in the recent television drama series Downton Abbey never had this kind of disconnect. For this was not a domestic squabble studded with old grudges. It was a historic tale of a young queen, about the same age as Elizabeth I when she mounted the throne, facing her first test on the throne and her treatment of it. This epic tale of the royal sisters dominated my thoughts for many years. I did not feel ready to write it at the time. However, my dedicated interest in British royalty, and strong-minded women in general, had taken hold of me. I wrote 2 successful biographies, Vivien Leigh and Sonia Tolstoy. Certainly their husbands, Laurence Olivier and Leo Tolstoy, could be called royalty in their own spheres. I then spent 3 years in archives of various sorts searching for the material I needed to write Matriarch, Queen Mary and the House of Windsor. By then, the affair of, as the newspapers called it, the Princess and the Pilot, was long over. But I was up on my British history, and had the good fortune to be able to interview many of the survivors, downstairs and upstairs, of Queen Mary's reign as Queen Consort to George V. By chance, I had also become a close friend to Peter Townsend. Peter, remarried and living in Paris, had decided to write a book that would include the history of the American side of his family, of which he knew very little, except that a male descendant had married a young American woman back in the early 1800s. He needed help in searching out those roots, and in the social history at that time in the United States. I could not actually help him in his research, but I was able to get someone stateside who could do it for him. He brought up Princess Margaret, not I. It was one of those, well, I suppose you know kind of things. Only what the newspapers reported, I told him. Eventually I confessed that I would like to write a book about the royal sisters, as their relationship fascinated me. There were so many difficulties they had to ford. First, their father's unlikely ascent to the throne, which made Elizabeth the star in the family, whereas Margaret had been previously. A complete, unexpected shake-up. It was always assumed in their household that Uncle David, as they referred to Edward VIII, would marry an acceptable bride and have a family of his own. With his abdication it became important that Elizabeth be given special training and a deeper understanding of the monarchy and of the country whose throne it had occupied, and that she might well do one day. Margaret was excluded in these one-to-one studies, which brought Elizabeth ever closer to her father, while her sister was kept busy otherwise. There was her music and young friends. She had a good singing voice, loved theatre music the most, did hilariously funny take-offs on friends of whom she had many. In an ordinary family, it is possible that she would have sought a life in the theatre, and been successful at it, so said Noel Coward, who knew something about success in the theatre. I began the book. Peter turned out to be a great help and inspiration. He was not living in England, although after all this time, after his remarriage, Margaret would marry a year later to Anthony Armstrong-Jones, friends said in retaliation. He and his new family might have had no trouble in establishing a home in England. He was terribly bitter. His forehead would always furrow, his mouth tighten when he spoke about being exiled from his homeland for many years in distant countries, for no other reason except for having been decently and strongly in love with a princess of the realm. During the writing of the book, I got 2 truly threatening letters, a bit frightening, from his first wife, advising me that I had better not write anything about her in the book, which he heard I was engaged in at present. In truth, there was no need for me to write much about her. Peter secured the divorce and custody of the 2 boys, which seemed to state the case clearly. But this was to be a story of 2 women at a dramatic time in their lives. Margaret's problem was also her sister, the Queen's, dilemma, and not only was she coping with her new heavy responsibilities, a complete change in her life, she was dealing with serious problems in her marriage. Another decision had to be made. Philip was dispatched on a year-long tour of duty to the farthest regions of the realm. The sisters' relationship was never smooth. They were, however, bound by blood and dedication.